Hi, my name's Carl. Today I want to talk about, in fact, not just talk about, I'm going to read to you today my submission to the Committee on Economics regarding the currency restrictions on the use of cash Bill 2019 provisions. I will be stopping occasionally just to make comment as I go. So this is my letter to Treasury. Now, just before I start, I do have a couple of birds hanging around, parrots. So if you're wondering what that is, that's them. And getting more to the point, this is a really important subject for Australians, and you really do need to be more, if you're not already, you do need to be aware of what's going on economically around the world, because what's coming to Australia is going to be coming to the rest of the world if we don't stand up for it. Now, Australia being a soft target has been targeted quite early for this provision. There are other countries that already have this, particularly or notably countries like Greece. I'm not sure about Spain, but these countries that are having massive social and economic problems regarding the cash ban. Anyways, I don't want to ramble on. So this is my letter to the Senate Standing Committee. Thank you for the opportunity to submit comment to the Senate Standing Committee on Economics regarding currency restrictions on the use of cash Bill 2019 provisions. As a private citizen taking a personal interest in the conversation, I sincerely trust that my opinions will be taken into consideration, as should be the want of any government in seeking an objective and independent view from all stakeholders in order to overcome blind spots and the possibility of unforeseen risk. Given that I do not have a degree in economics, I am at a loss as to why Treasury is determined to have the proposed bill in effect for an unrealistic January 29 commencement, and why this matter is so urgent that after this committee was formed, a concerted effort was made on the 24th of October to thrust this bill through Parliament. Private citizens like myself were already alerted to the fact that Treasury presented the artifice of tax evasion and money laundering as the primary drivers to implement the proposed bill, and as such I wrote to Treasury outlining my argument that Austrac FinTech reporting illustrated that the number of investigations relative to this matter are minuscule. 108 arrests and 90 account closures during the fiscal years 2018-2019. Now, in comparison to Australia's total population, which is over 25 million. As well, I raised the argument that the majority of the prosecutions within the 2014 case studies report saw relatively short sentences, fines, or good behaviour bonds that clearly indicate examples of trivial crimes committed by Australians who appear completely oblivious to the AML-CTF reporting processes. So the AML-CTF reporting processes is the Australian Money Laundering and Counter-Terrorism Financing, and basically they watch every Australian who makes a deposit of over $10,000, and all banks, institutions, etc. have to report when an Australian moves more than $10,000. Now these processes have been around since the 90s, but it seems that a lot of Australians are not aware that this is in place, and some fools think that they can get away with money laundering, with tax evasion, etc., when they are completely unaware that these reporting processes are in place. And I'll talk about that again in a moment, so let's continue. The minority of the case studies involved complex cartels involving people smuggling, drug trafficking and fraud of international scale, and whom altogether clearly established that no group of offenders offer a remote parallel to warrant committing the overwhelming majority of innocent Australian businesses and private citizens to this proposed legislation. Further, it is well established that Australia's small to large businesses and regular residents for tax purposes are statistically incapable of realising the implied high participation rate of tax avoidance without being identified and prosecuted within a reasonable time frame. Given that federal tax fraud equates to, you ready for it, 0.01% of the population. That's not even 1%. 0.01% of the population get busted annually for tax fraud and tax evasion. So given that the federal tax fraud equates to that percentage of the population annually, the rationale proposed in the draft legislation is again framing the overwhelming majority of private Australians as well as small to large businesses as being culpable of tax evasion where it is demonstrably not the case. Given the arguments I've brought forward, I ask this committee to establish if government is truly justified in its position to commit the entire Australian population to this proposed bill. With a radical move to affect the largest and widely infecund section of the population with ever-reducing cash restrictions, it becomes evident that the Australian government is unwilling to accept that a tolerable level of the cash economy will be used to avoid official channels, while such a shadow economy remains by virtue of its very nature an organic offshoot of every cash economy worldwide. Now I just want to come back to population with ever-reduced cash restrictions, because, and I'm going to refer to one of my citations here, that the government argued to lower cash payment limit to $2,000 and introduce harsh penalties. Now, already, and we haven't even put into place this bill, and they're arguing that $10,000 is way too much, and if I was going to go and spend $2,000 somewhere, somebody is going to have to report me and see that I'm not doing something illegal. Now that's $2,000. Now, you know, not everybody's going to have $10,000 to spend every day, but businesses will. A lot of businesses will. And of course, every time they deposit $10,000 into a bank account, then of course they will be reported, not necessarily acted upon, because it needs to be determined if they're doing something illegal or not. Now, coming back to where we were. With Australia's median shadow economy recently being identified as one of the world's smallest at 13.4%, and being well below the average median of the combined 158 world economies at 32.7%, Schneider and the reporting by the Austrac Fintel Alliance clearly demonstrate that Australia's lean shadow economy is not an unreasonable one. And it's not. It is also my opinion, and one I am confident is supported by a large section of the Australian population, that the existence of a shadow economy, while inevitable, can in itself be virtuous for the broad economy so long as it remains under tight control and within reason, as I have here demonstrated to be the case. Given that such an economy cannot be outright eliminated from a cash society, I would argue that the ideal of the Black Economy Task Force in so ignoring Schneider and recommending a $10,000 cash limit will highly likely result in a poor impact upon Australia's shadow economy. Given such an outcome, Treasury, together with highly influential stakeholders, will demand from government to substantially lower the limit on cash, thus causing a cataclysmic shift in Australia's economic and national culture as businesses come to cease transactions in cash. And by extension, private Australians will come to be deprived of their right to the use of legal tender, and otherwise become compulsorily herded into the corporate banking system along with the terms and conditions that comes with it. Given the risk that our government is blindly willing to take, combined with the high likelihood that the above notion may indeed become a reality, I ask for this committee to seriously consider the implications that this bill will have on the future of our great nation and its people before recommending to government to reject this bill outright. Failing this outcome, because government wants this to go through, failing this outcome, I insist that the legislation or relevant instrument state that the cash payment limit be binding and not negotiable to change, under any circumstances, for the reasons that I have raised above. Thus sums up my primary contribution to this committee. I would like to add supplemental comment that may not be effectual to this committee's objectives, but I wish to be heard on further concerns regarding the state of our nation in relation to the proposed bill and the world economy at large. And this comes down to why I am posting this on YouTube right now. So bear with me, because I have an idea as to why they want this cash bill put into place and why Australians will have to suffer. Okay. Normally Treasury would receive around about 30. Well, I've heard from reliable sources that Treasury would normally only receive about 30 responses to any bill that they wish to put through. This time around, they had a huge amount of contributions or comments, which amounted to somewhere about 2,500, and most of those, Treasury decided to say that those contributions were relating to a particular political party, which has nothing to do with myself or most of those people who put in comment. So with that in mind, this is how I've started my further comment. There are so many approaches to take to appeal the exposure draft currency restrictions on the use of Cash Bill 2019. And even writing an appeal such as mine is altogether risky and difficult to deliver in the face of government's blind determination to execute the proposed bill that this committee has been tasked to inquire into. It appears that decisions were made several years ago, likely at the G8, G20 level, to establish the employment of what was to become the Black Economy Task Force, whose position I prefer was to deliver the predetermined recommendations that would allow government to put into place an agenda with which they cannot be forthright to their constituency. So whatever they set up this task force for and tried to push this bill and the 2015 bill, I forget what it's called, but here it is here. Whatever is the case, the government has an agenda and they cannot be forthright with their constituency. By taking such a position, one must ask if their government has been beguiled into taking this uncompromising course of action by a source or sources that do not have Australia's best interests at heart. This was underscored when the media announced that many, possibly my own submission, were likely rejected for being out of scope. Such a position by Treasury pervades the process of writing a submission from the public perception with an overarching sense of foreboding and unnecessary caution. Do you know how much caution I had to take in writing this because of what Treasury had done? There is great concern with those private Australians who offered their submissions to Treasury that businesses will stop accepting cash due to the weak terms of the cash limitations, but also alarm that the public will become compulsorily herded into the private banking system to become Australia's financial liability for the impending housing market / world financial crash. I mean, you just look around us and you can see the world economy is in dire straits, and we know that the government has been lying to us regarding the housing bubble. It's going to crash. One can openly see this trend being applied worldwide with those nations that are already committed to negative interest rates and who have blindly accepted the economic advice of the very powers that led the world into this unstable economic ecosystem in the first place. Treasury's unwillingness to repatriate Australia's gold reserves from the unprofitable and likely criminal Bank of England's gold lending scheme, and you should look into that, as well as their unwillingness to demand a thorough audit of our entire gold reserve held within that bank, coupled with the want to sell rather than bolster our gold reserves as an insurance against the potential of worldwide financial downturn, does not fill the public with confidence. I mean, Seriously, we're not bolstering our gold. China, Russia, they're just two examples. America, the UK, they are bolstering their gold reserves because of the impending market crash. And what's Australia doing? We're selling it. We have trusted the Bank of England to use our gold reserves, which is not here in Australia, it's over there in England, and they are trading our gold bars, probably melting those down, and we will never ever 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 see our gold ever again. That puts us in a very compromising position, and that's probably got a lot to do with why this bill is trying to be passed. But it gets better. Treasury's motivations to make this scheme come to pass whilst offering such a weak excuse as tax evasion and money laundering itself raises critical questions with the public as to what Treasury and the Ministry have to hide. The most likely scenario that I can identify for the entire conversation of Australia's economic and sovereign survival should squarely point to the cover-up of missing physical gold holdings by the central banks. Meanwhile, there is another subject that must be approached relative to the proposed bill, and that is in the acquisition of big data. So I want you to imagine for a moment a nationwide cash ban with the entire population committed, willingly or otherwise, to digital commerce. Now, couple that with the Department of Human Resources IBM Z mainframe computer running such software as IBM's Cognos multi-cloud data analytics to monitor and precisely report on the Australian economy with the absolute clarity of over 25 million individuals' spending habits throughout their lifetime, coupled with every individual business transaction conducted daily. Government and their reporting agencies will not renege on any opportunity to draft laws and create policies that will tighten the economy at the expense of enforcing every individual to live exactly how the government will expect them to live, where it does not agree with how its people choose to or arrive at while living out their lives. Yes, the Australian government will have everything at their disposal to make highly accurate decisions and choices for the economy, which is good, but at what cost? Australia is not a business, it's a nation of individual people, and I warn that the ideal of castrating the shadow economy will open an avenue for something entirely unexpected to take its place, because something has to take its place. With oversight of every move made by every private Australian, coupled with the sharing of national economic data with multinational economic data via the Federal Reserve System, and multi-cloud sharing for the benefit of all nations, the artificial intelligence that is at the very core of all big data software management will only ever have a digital heart, and it will never have the best interests of the humans that make Australia the nation that we currently know and love, warts and all. Now, I don't want to get too tied up in artificial intelligence, but what I do want to really reiterate is that using big data from various countries, bringing it together and making comparisons and seeing where you can tweak the economy, it could be good, but it could also be terrible detriment to the people living within the economies. You see, and this is where it comes down to, even the people in government are becoming bean counters, and they're not so much interested in the people themselves, but the economy, because that's what looks good. Once this computer system is set up, this mainframe that they have, which cost like, what was it, $5 billion or something? 500 million, something like that, I don't know. There's no getting out of it. Because once we start sharing that information with other countries and everything, but we will, then there's no turning back. And I'll come to that point right now. So, too, there will never be an opportunity to reverse this decision once Australia is committed into the fold as obviated by Brexit, thus resulting in the loss of national freedom and natural creativity toward the establishment of an entirely contrived national culture and identity that will be resented by all Australians. This is what's going to happen. I am in no doubt that Australia is being set up with unfathomable consequences that will come with currency restrictions on the use of Cash Bill 2019. Having said all of this, if government wishes to go ahead and commit Australia to this proposed legislation without heed, I will never feel guilty for having spoken up and publicly demeaned, because I will be demeaned for this. Neither will I be held personally responsible when the intended economic policies and strategic moves are proven to be of tragic and irreconcilable consequence to our great nation for generations to come. And that's all I have to say on this matter. Thank you very much. Just before I go, please subscribe and leave comments. I love reading your comments. That's what's more important to me. I reply to as many comments as I possibly can, if not all. Thank you very much, and I'll see you again. Bye.